Okay, so I have my quilt pressed and stay stitched. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm going to actually measure this. I have it on my design wall here at home. If you don't have a design wall, it's fine. You can do it on the floor. You can also fold it and measure it that way. Whatever's easiest for you. Okay, so I'm going to measure it kind of right at the middle. If you're unsure, sometimes when you have borders, right, the top edge of the border measures differently than the middle. So you could measure it a few places, kind of compare. I'm pretty confident that my quilt is pretty square, so I'm gonna just measure right in the middle on the width and the length. Okay, I have my handy sticky note. I'm gonna write my dimensions on, and then later I'm gonna go over our take-in sheet and how to fill that out with the dimensions you've come up with for your quilt top and your quilt back. But right now I'm just trying to plan out my quilt back for this. And so once I'm done here, I'm gonna go to my stash, which is over here, and see what I can find to make a quilt back for this, okay? So the first thing I'm gonna do is just measure right in the middle, the width. This one is 46.5. Now, wide. For our purposes, like the closest half inch is fine. Really where that comes in for us is when we put it into our computerized system and we put the quilt dimensions in. So if I'm building this in my automation system, I'm probably just gonna put in 47 instead of 46.5. But you know, like I said, closest half inch is fine. And then we're gonna measure, we'll start down here. We're gonna measure the length. And this tape measure I have is way overkill, but that's all right, it's what I got. And then we have 58.5. So 46.5 by 58.5. And I'm gonna take that now and I'm going to use that to make my quilt back. Now, as a reminder, for quilt backs, I'm using cotton. So I need 3 to 4 extra inches on the backing, okay? So for easy math, I'm gonna go with 4 extra inches, so 8 overall. So if I add that to my 46.5, okay? So we're gonna add, I'm just making notes on my sticky note. However your process works is just fine, okay? And of course my pen's running out of ink. Okay, so I have now 54.5 by, what is that, 66.5. Okay, so my backing needs to be 54.5 by 66.5 to have the required extra inches all the way around. Because I tend to not like half-inch things as far as my personal, I'm probably just gonna round up and say my back needs to be 55 by 67 or thereabouts, okay? Because I'm working with, 45-inch wide fabric, my preference is a single horizontal seam. So I'm probably gonna try and find some pieces of fabric that are close to that 55-inch width. And then I'm gonna piece those with a horizontal seam. So I'm probably gonna end up with something that's closer to like 55 by 90, right? So I'm gonna have extra, doesn't bother me. Or I might find 3 smaller pieces, I don't know. So I'm gonna go dig through my stash and see what I can find. And then we'll come back and I'll talk through kind of piecing backs when you're using multiple pieces. If you would rather just skip this whole process, we have extra wide backings at the studio you can choose from. So I could skip this whole process and just go with a wide back that I didn't have to piece. In which case I would just buy, 55 inches of wide back fabric. I would have some left over, that's okay. But I am on a mission to use up my extra fabric, so I'm gonna go dig through my fabric and see what I can find. Okay, so I didn't show the whole process of me figuring out the backing, but I'm kind of partway through piecing the back right now, so I just figured it might be helpful for me to talk through kind of what I did here. So I found 2 pieces of fabric that are actually out of print Tula, but I have been hoarding for forever, so I'm using it, that actually are in this quilt. So I pulled it, and what I did is found, so I had this fun anchor fabric and then this one called Octo Garden. Okay, so I had about 2 yards I had 2 yards of the anchor, and then I had, about just shy, I had about 60 inches of the Octo Garden, okay? So not quite enough for me just to do like one seam and make it kind of just like one on the top, one on the bottom. So what I decided to do was get extra creative, and I cut my Octo Garden piece. I just cut them down to and a little bit over. So I have two like just over 30-inch pieces, and then I cut my anchor piece at 36. Okay, so now I have this piece here that's about my 66. I needed 66 and a half. So like I feel like that was meant to be. Okay, so about 66 and a half inches of length now, and I have width of fabric here. So this is about 42 inches once you take off the selvage. Okay, so I now have two pieces like this, and I decided to go super fun and do, they are of course directional. So I picked, not only did I pick fabric that I can't get more of, but I also picked directional fabric. So you can see like my octopus goes vertically and my anchors go vertically. Okay, so I cut them up. That one has octopus on top. The other side has octopus on bottom and anchors on the top. So I'm gonna have this like 4-patch back, okay? It's not gonna have an even line, and that's fine with me. And I'm gonna have extra, which is fine because I think I might cut some of it off to make binding. So that'll be a separate video though. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm basically just gonna take these and I'm gonna sew these two pieces together to make the whole big back, okay? But one thing I like to kind of point out is I don't like to have, so see, here's my selvage edge. So often what I do when I piece backs is I will actually piece, when I'm piecing on the seam. Now my pieces I put together here, I just use my standard 1/4 inch to piece together, okay? But for this, what I'm gonna do is I'm actually going to piece, it ends up being about 5/8, depending on how wide your selvage is. I like to actually be able to cut my selvage off, but I don't do that until after I piece it together, okay? Because there's more tension in this selvage. And so I'm gonna have, not only am I gonna have horizontal seams in this, but I'm gonna have a big long vertical seam. And if you have done any research on long arming, we really prefer horizontal seams. So I'm gonna just throw all the wrenches in and do both, which we're gonna square it up, and I'm gonna show you how to do that. But what I wanna do is help myself as the long armor of this quilt and take these selvages off so I don't have to fight with that extra tension, you know, on top of the tension of the seam, okay? So I'm just gonna go ahead and stitch these two together, and then I'll show you what my seam allowance looks like and how I trim that down for the final kind of back. Okay, I have stitched my seam for my backing and I'll show you here. So I ended up stitching, and it's kind of hard to see because, but let me do this. Okay, so I ended up stitching about a 1-inch seam allowance here, okay? Because what I want to do is get rid of this selvage edge, okay? Now I was able to do that because I know I have plenty of width here. Like I ended up, you know, with probably about, you know, with usable with the fabric, like 80 some odd inches here, okay? Because once this is open. But what I'm gonna do, I really only want maybe about 1/2 inch of seam allowance here. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and just trim down my seam allowance before I press it. And then I'm gonna go ahead and press it. Now, for seams like this, I do tend to press them open. Honestly, it's whatever your preference is, but I will show you one key thing that I do when I'm done, you know, pressing and squaring up my back, and that is to stay stitch all of the seams on the back, especially if I have, well, actually either if I have vertical or horizontal, because again, it's especially important for horizontal because when we load it on the leader, we're pinning through that seam, right? And so as we're putting it on there, sometimes it can open up, and that's like, we don't want that to happen. We want the back to stay together, right? So I'm just gonna go ahead and, okay, so you can see what I've got going on here. So my cutting table's here, and I have my 1/2 inch lined up at my stitching line, okay? And I'm just gonna trim this selvage off, or at least most of it, okay? I want most of that gone. And there's my piecing here. And if you have not used these, this is the Quilter's Select Ruler. Seems like Home carries them, but I love this. Like, look at this. There's grip on this, so I can literally move my fabric with this ruler, but also, I was a little aggressive there, but it does not slip on you. So you don't need an extra like handle or anything. It stays put. Let me actually put it back where it's supposed to be. And so I really love these, not just for doing this, but just for cutting in general. Okay, so I've trimmed that off. I'm gonna go press it, and then we're gonna square it up, and then I'll show you how I stay stitched the back.